The night was silent except for the hum of rain against glass, the kind that turns the world into a watercolor of shadows and reflections. Inside the Mortons' suburban home, a single light glowed faintly from the hallway, casting a golden stripe across the polished floor. When police arrived just past dawn, they found the body of a man lying near the foot of the staircase, motionless, blood congealed against tile. His wife, trembling in a silk robe, told them she'd been asleep. Her voice didn't crack. Her eyes didn't flinch. She spoke as though she were watching herself from somewhere far away. But Detective Kessler knew the kind of quiet that hides something deeper. He watched her hands perfectly still, her pulse too calm. Then, amid the fragments of chaos, overturned vase, shattered phone, he noticed the smartwatch on her wrist, still ticking, still recording. Its screen glowed faintly, a silent witness to everything that happened, or she claimed to be dreaming. By sunrise, the house had become a quiet theater of methodical movement. Crime scene technicians, note-taking detectives, soft murmurs over radio chatter. Claire sat at the dining table wrapped in a blanket, her gaze fixed on nothing. She told them she'd gone to bed around 11, hadn't heard a thing until she woke to find the front door ajar. Her voice was steady, practiced, each word polished before it left her lips. Kessler listened, nodding, his pen motionless above his pad. He'd seen this before, the calm after calculation. Then he saw it again, that flicker on her wrist. The watch still synced to her phone, still recording health data through the night. In a world where even silence has a heartbeat, truth has nowhere left to hide. Outside, neighbors gathered behind yellow tape, their whispers weaving through the hum of engines. Olivia Price, the woman from next door, clutched a mug of coffee, eyes wide as she told officers she'd heard muffled voices around midnight. No screams, just tension, like a conversation held through gritted teeth. Kessler glanced toward the window, curtains half drawn, the reflection of flashing lights painting Claire's silhouette inside. Every story in this neighborhood ended the same way, with someone saying they never thought it could happen here. But every home has its shadows, and some learn to live with them until they finally strike back. In the forensic lab downtown, Mia Tran leaned over a computer screen, the smartwatch data beginning to sync. The monitor pulsed with heart rate graphs and motion logs, tiny lines forming the shape of a lie. Between 12:16 and 12:43 a.m., Claire's pulse spiked violently. Steps counted in short bursts, then flatlined into stillness. It wasn't sleep. It was panic. Data doesn't dream. Kessler watched silently, jaw tight, the weight of confirmation settling in. For every careful lie told at the kitchen table, the watch had already whispered its truth into a circuit that never forgets. Night returned, and the Morton house sat under the same indifferent rain. Windows black, tape fluttering like breath over a wound. Inside, the silence was heavier now, as if the walls themselves remembered. Kessler stood alone by the staircase, the smell of copper and cleaning agents hanging in the air. He looked up toward the bedroom door, closed, untouched, and thought of the woman who claimed she'd slept through her husband's death. He checked his watch. Its ticking echoed the rhythm of another watch, still sitting in evidence. Machines never sleep. They just wait. And somewhere inside that quiet digital heart was the moment everything changed. By morning, the Mortons' house had become an evidence museum. Claire sat under the sterile light of the precinct's interview room, a paper cup of untouched coffee before her. She repeated the same story. She went to bed at 11, slept through the night, woke to chaos. Her tone was almost serene, as though she'd convinced herself of it long ago. Kessler listened, patient, his gaze fixed not on her words but on the rhythm of her breathing. He'd learned that lies breathe differently. Shallow, measured, rehearsed. Across the hall, Mia downloaded the smartwatch data into a forensic log, her eyes widening as she traced the graphs irregular peaks. At the same moment Claire claimed to be asleep, her body had been wide awake, moving, pacing, her heart racing in a storm of adrenaline. The truth was no longer in question. The only mystery left was how long she thought she could keep pretending. In the observation room, Kessler stood beside a one-way mirror as Mia entered with a tablet. The data unfolded like a confession. Steps logged at 12:23 a.m., heart rate at 128 BPM. Brief stillness, then another burst of movement. Sleep doesn't come in patterns like that. It dances to fear, not rest. Mia spoke softly, her tone caught between fascination and dread, noting that the data aligned perfectly with the estimated time of death. Kessler exhaled slowly, his reflection merging with Claire's on the other side of the glass. Technology had turned her body into evidence, each heartbeat a syllable in a language she could never take back. Claire's attorney arrived mid-morning, his voice crisp with authority, insisting she be released pending further investigation. But Kessler wasn't ready to let go. He leaned back, arms folded, letting the silence stretch like a noose. Claire didn't look at him, just at the watch still on her wrist. He'd noticed she hadn't taken it off once. Not during the interview, not when she cried, not when she told the story again. The device that betrayed her had become her armor now, a talisman of control in a world slipping away. When Kessler finally spoke, his voice was soft but surgical. "You said you were asleep. Your watch says otherwise." The air between them went still, every lie suspended in that electric moment before denial begins. That evening, the lab's sterile quiet was broken only by the hum of monitors. Mia zoomed in on a spike. 12:29 a.m. The precise moment Evan's heart had stopped. The watch on Claire's wrist had registered her pulse surging within seconds of his death. There were no coincidences here. Every heartbeat, every tremor, every restless movement told the story she couldn't silence. Mia sent the findings to Kessler, her message brief. She wasn't asleep. Across town, Kessler sat in his car under the streetlight, watching the rain bead on the windshield. Somewhere beyond that quiet storm, Claire's calm voice replayed in his head, like a song meant to hide the sound of screaming. Claire was escorted home late that night. The house was still sealed off, its silence thicker now than before. She walked through the dim foyer, her eyes drifting over the taped outline on the floor where Evan's body had been. For a moment, her mask slipped. The calm cracked by something raw, almost grief, almost guilt. Upstairs, the bedroom was untouched, the bed still made on her side. She sat at the edge, glancing at the smartwatch charging by the lamp. Its black screen reflected her face, divided between shadow and light. Somewhere inside its circuitry, the truth still pulsed, waiting, ready to speak again. Morning broke gray and brittle. The Morton house sat in uneasy quiet while across town, the forensic lab buzzed with quiet discovery. Mia leaned closer to the screen as she aligned the smartwatch logs with Evan's final movements from the home's security footage. The pattern emerged like a ghost in code, spikes of motion followed by sharp drops, irregular heart rhythms, moments of stillness broken by violent motion. This wasn't panic. It was confrontation. Each spike corresponded to a voice command registered by a smart speaker. The last one recorded at 12:28 a.m., before the system went silent. Kessler stared at the timeline on her screen, tracing the rise and fall like the breath of truth itself. The watch had captured not only her movements but her emotions, fear, anger, intent, all mapped in the precision of numbers. It was no longer data. It was a diary, written in heartbeats. In the kitchen of her silent home, Claire tried to reclaim normalcy. She moved like a ghost among the remnants of routine. Coffee brewing, blinds half drawn, a robe wrapped too tightly around her frame. But every sound carried accusation. She scrolled through her phone, ignoring the missed calls, her gaze finally landing on the empty space where Evan's mug used to sit. The smartwatch on her wrist vibrated faintly, a notification from the cloud backup she thought she'd erased. It was like the device itself refused to forget, whispering reminders of the night she'd rather rewrite. Guilt doesn't shout. It lingers in vibrations, in screens that light up when the world goes still. At headquarters, Kessler studied a printed timeline. Columns of time stamps, heartbeats, and movement bursts. Each detail painted a portrait more human than any confession. The argument had started at 12:16. The first violent motion appeared at 12:24. By 12:29, both watches, hers and Evan's, had recorded a sudden surge, then silence. It was almost poetic, the way truth sinks between devices even when people refuse to. He thought of his own failed marriage, how arguments could feel like heart attacks, how silence could feel like death. This case wasn't about technology. It was about emotion, the kind that leaves fingerprints even in data. He knew he was closing in, but part of him almost wished he wasn't. Mia called Kessler into the lab again that evening. She'd decrypted data fragments from the watch's accelerometer, a sensor meant to track movement. It had recorded the swing of an arm, sharp and repetitive, consistent with a violent strike. The watch had effectively filmed the act, not in images but in motion. The realization was chilling. Claire hadn't just moved. She'd fought. She'd ended something. The numbers didn't lie, and they didn't forgive. Maya's eyes trembled as she spoke, the truth finally too human to quantify. Kessler stood silent, the hum of machines filling the space like a digital requiem. Every heartbeat on that graph had become evidence of intention, and it pulsed like guilt made visible. That night, Kessler drove back to the Morton home. Rain slicked the streets again, mirroring the night it all began. He parked beneath a flickering streetlight and sat for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the engine. Inside, Claire stood at her window, watching the same reflection shimmer across the glass. Two lives orbiting the same secret, separated by truth neither could undo. Kessler finally stepped out, his coat soaking through in seconds. He looked up at her silhouette and knew she was still awake. Somewhere inside that house, the watch still ticked, still remembering. In a world ruled by silence, technology had become conscience. And conscience, once awakened, doesn't rest. By dawn, the storm had passed, but the tension inside the precinct only sharpened. Kessler entered the lab to find Mia standing over a new set of data overlays. GPS logs, health app syncs, and deleted entries recovered from Claire's phone. Every trace pointed to a plan, not a reaction. The smartwatch had sensed location data hours before the murder, pinpointing a late-night walk that didn't match her story. It wasn't just deception, it was choreography. Kessler rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of digital ghosts pressing in. Technology wasn't just exposing her lies, it was reconstructing her mind, step by step. In that hum of circuitry and quiet dread, the case stopped being about proving guilt and became about understanding motive. The watch had revealed what she did. Now, he needed to know why. In Claire's kitchen, morning sunlight filtered through spotless windows as she sat before a journalist, a woman with sympathetic eyes and a recorder on the table. The interview was her idea, a desperate attempt to shape her story before someone else did. Her words were soft, trembling, painting herself as the grieving widow unfairly targeted by algorithms and suspicion. But beneath the surface of sorrow, her eyes kept darting toward the smartwatch on her wrist, as though afraid it might speak again. The journalist nodded, unaware that the woman before her was trying not to unravel. Outside, the sound of distant sirens faded into the hum of another ordinary day. A cruel contrast to the storm that still lived inside her. Back at the precinct, Kessler stared at a new photo. Evan's smartwatch recovered from evidence. Its final data sync told the same story from the other side. A spike in heart rate, frantic movement. Then, nothing. When he placed both watches' timelines side by side, they moved like a duet, hers racing as his faltered, the rhythm of two lives colliding in silence. He could almost feel it. The last moments before impact. The last surge of life before everything froze. Kessler had seen hundreds of crime scenes, but this was different. This was intimacy turned weapon. He whispered to himself, "They always leave traces, even in the dark." And in that silence, truth felt less like justice and more like tragedy replayed in code. Late that afternoon, Mia uncovered a final detail hidden deep in the watch's memory logs. A voice command made at 12:25 a.m. "Stop recording," the smart speaker had obeyed. But the smartwatch hadn't. The digital witness had continued to listen, mapping every tremor and motion even in silence. When Kessler played the raw file, static filled the speakers, then faint movement. Breathing, a muffled cry, a single whispered word that sounded like Evan's name. It wasn't evidence they could use in court. Not yet. But it was enough to make Kessler's pulse quicken. Machines had captured what humans had tried to erase. And no amount of denial could overwrite the sound of fear preserved in circuitry. That night, Kessler returned once more to the Morton Street. The house was dark, cordoned off, its windows reflecting the amber streetlight. He watched from his car as Claire stepped outside, wrapped in a heavy coat, her movements slow, deliberate. She stood in the rain again, staring at the front door as if hoping the past might open it. For a brief second, her gaze found his through the windshield, and time hung still between them. He saw the truth there, not in guilt, but in resignation. She knew the evidence was closing in, that the story she built was unraveling thread by thread. As she turned away, Kessler whispered to the night, "The watch never lies." By morning, Claire's poise began to fray. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes ringed in sleepless gray. The cameras waiting outside her house buzzed like vultures, the public's fascination feeding on every rumor. Inside, she paced the kitchen floor and measured circles, replaying her statements to police. But lies, once spoken, echo louder than truth. Each repetition sounded less like memory and more like rehearsal. The smartwatch sat on the counter beside her phone, both devices glowing faintly, as if waiting for her to confess. When she caught her reflection in the dark screen, she saw not the victim she wanted the world to believe in, but a woman cornered by her own story. And in that reflection, the cracks began to show, not in her face, but in her certainty. At the precinct, Kessler leaned against the window, watching rain streak the glass as Mia entered with fresh updates. She'd traced deleted files from Claire's smartwatch backup. Text messages drafted, but never sent. Fragments of fear disguised as affection. One line stood out, "You'll make me do something I can't undo." The words hit harder than data. They revealed a woman cornered between control and collapse. Kessler exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. Every case reaches a point where evidence stops speaking and emotion takes over. He knew it was time to confront her, not with anger, but with truth. And truth, when spoken aloud, can sound like the sharp edge of mercy. The second interrogation felt different. The room was the same, cold, metallic. But the balance had shifted. Claire's hands trembled as she adjusted the cuff of her sweater, her watch conspicuously absent. Kessler sat opposite her, voice low, steady, the way you speak to someone standing on a ledge. He showed her the data logs, the timestamps, the deleted messages. She didn't look at the screen, she looked at him. And for the first time, her composure cracked. Her silence spoke louder than confession, eyes glistening with a truth she could no longer contain. Kessler leaned forward, his voice a whisper. "You didn't plan to kill him. You just stopped trying not to." She closed her eyes, the tears falling soundlessly, her face no longer a mask, but a collapse. That evening, Mia sat alone in the lab, reviewing the smartwatch footage one last time. She wasn't searching for new evidence. She was searching for understanding. She'd seen murder reduced to pixels before, but this one felt personal. It wasn't rage or jealousy. It was fatigue, the kind that breaks quietly. On the screen, the heart rate data pulsed rhythmically until it didn't. She turned off the monitor and sat in darkness, the hum of machines filling the void. Technology could prove guilt, but it could never explain pain. Somewhere between the numbers, there was a heartbeat that just wanted to stop hurting. That night, Claire sat in her darkened living room, the house heavy with memories. Rain tapped softly against the window, a rhythm that mirrored her restless thoughts. The watch lay on the coffee table, its black screen lifeless now. She reached for it, tracing its edge with trembling fingers, whispering something too quiet for anyone to hear. Outside, headlights approached, the silhouette of Kessler's car gliding to a stop. She didn't move. She just watched the reflection of his approach ripple across the glass. Somewhere deep down, she knew it was over. Not because they had proof, but because she was tired of pretending. The line between guilt and grief had dissolved, leaving only silence. The morning came cold and brittle, the kind of light that exposes everything. Kessler arrived at the lab just as Mia was finalizing her latest reconstruction. An algorithmic playback, combining smartwatch telemetry with ambient audio from the smart speaker. What unfolded on the screen wasn't video, but movement rendered as motion trails, a ghostly choreography of two bodies in the dark. The data was terrifyingly precise. Claire's steps, Evan's movements, the sudden jolt, the stillness. For the first time, the evidence wasn't just numbers. It was narrative. Mia looked away as the graph flatlined, whispering, "It caught everything." Kessler stood frozen, the weight of certainty pressing on his chest. There was no room left for doubt, no comfort in denial. Technology had witnessed the moment life ended, and now it was showing them without mercy. Back at the precinct, the air felt heavier than usual. Kessler sat alone with the data logs spread before him, reading the sequence like scripture. He could see every heartbeat, hers rising, his fading. Two lines that intersected at the same moment, then diverged forever. It wasn't rage that ended him, but a breaking point long in the making. The silence between them that night had been a storm disguised as calm. Kessler leaned back, closing his eyes. He wasn't just solving a case anymore. He was tracing the anatomy of collapse. The smartwatch had become the most honest witness he'd ever known. Heartbeats and gravity replacing human testimony. Truth had never felt this mechanical or this human. When they brought Claire back in, the calm she once wore like armor was gone. She sat quietly across from Kessler, her hands folded, eyes downcast. He played the reconstructed sequence, an abstract ballet of motion and stillness rendered in soft light on the wall. It wasn't graphic, but it was unmistakable. Her shoulders rose as the sound of static filled the room, her pulse visible in her throat. When the playback ended, silence filled the space like smoke. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, voice breaking. He wouldn't stop. Kessler didn't answer. He simply watched her, seeing both guilt and exhaustion intertwined. Technology had spoken, but in her confession, he finally heard something it couldn't record: remorse. Later that evening, Mia sat beside Kessler in the empty lab, watching the monitors fade to black. The data was conclusive, the case airtight, but neither of them felt victory. "It's strange," Mia said softly, "how something built to track our health can tell us how we die." Kessler nodded, eyes fixed on the last frozen image of the graph, the final heartbeat. Justice had been served by a machine that knew no empathy, only truth. Yet for all its precision, it couldn't capture what it meant. The slow decay of trust, the years of silence, the night that turned love into violence. The screen went dark, leaving only their reflections staring back. Rain fell again as Kessler left the station. He stood on the steps beneath the awning, coat pulled tight, eyes on the city glowing faintly through mist. Somewhere behind glass and wire, Claire waited for arraignment. The watch that once betrayed her now sat sealed in evidence. Its screen dark, but its truth eternal. Kessler thought about how far they'd come. From a broken body in a suburban hallway to a digital confession written in motion and pulse. As he stepped into the rain, he realized this was no longer about guilt. It was about the fragile line between what we say and what our technology remembers. The storm had washed the streets clean, but memory never really fades. The room was silent except for the hum of the overhead light. Claire sat alone at the steel table, wrists uncuffed but motionless, her gaze fixed on the watch resting in front of her. Its screen was black, but she could feel its presence, an echo of every heartbeat, every moment she wished she could undo. Kessler entered quietly, closing the door behind him with a soft click. There was no folder this time, no questions. Just two people and the truth suspended between them. He slid the watch toward her, his voice low. "You can tell it to stop now." For a moment she didn't move. Then her lips parted, trembling, and she whispered, "I already did." The words seemed to hang in the air, too fragile to survive. Kessler watched her, seeing not a monster but a woman who had been chasing silence until it finally caught her. As the recorder clicked on, Claire began to speak, not in fragments, not as a defense, but as memory. She told him about the months of tension, the arguments that never ended, the fear of losing control. Her words trembled but never broke. "He said I couldn't leave," she whispered, "and I believed him until I didn't." The confession came not as a cry for mercy, but as surrender. Kessler listened in silence, knowing the story would haunt him more than any crime scene ever could. There was no malice in her tone, only exhaustion. She wasn't confessing to murder. She was confessing to the moment she stopped being afraid. Outside the door, the soft hum of machinery recorded every syllable, sealing her truth in binary permanence. When her words finally stopped, the room fell utterly silent. Kessler reached over and turned off the recorder. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he stood, gathering the evidence bag that held the watch. It looked small now, insignificant. A device that had become both witness and judge. "It never lies," he said softly, almost to himself. Claire nodded faintly. "I know," she murmured. "That's why I wore it." Kessler met her gaze, the quiet realization settling in. She'd never intended to hide the truth, only to delay its arrival. Sometimes confession isn't about seeking forgiveness. It's about being seen, even if only by something that doesn't feel. Hours later, Kessler stepped out into the corridor. The noise of the precinct returned. Phones ringing, voices low, the endless hum of bureaucracy resuming after the storm. Through the observation window, he watched as officers led Claire away. Her posture was straight, her steps even, the same deliberate grace she'd carried through every lie. But something had changed. There was no defiance, no fear, only acceptance. As she passed the hallway mirror, her reflection caught his eye. For a brief second, she almost smiled, not in triumph, but in release. Kessler turned away, knowing that justice had arrived not through punishment, but through truth. Finally spoken aloud. That night, Kessler drove home beneath a sky scrubbed clean by rain. The city shimmered with reflected light, a quiet contrast to the weight he carried. In the passenger seat beside him lay the final report, pages of data, graphs, and transcriptions that could never capture what the case truly was. A love story that died quietly, recorded heartbeat by heartbeat. He parked by the river, and sat for a long while, watching the water ripple beneath the streetlights. Pulling his own smartwatch from his wrist, he set it on the dashboard. For the first time in months, he wanted silence without witnesses. The screen dimmed, leaving only his reflection in the glass. A man reminded that sometimes truth doesn't set you free. It simply refuses to be forgotten.